Here's the thing. I'm a 34-year-old, my husband is Mark. We've only been married for 2 years, but we've known each other for what feels like a lifetime. We were high school sweethearts and dated all through school. We fell head over heels in love, but life got in the way and things didn't work out at the time. It wasn't until years later that we reunited. It felt like fate had brought us back. We dated for about 4 years before getting married 2 years ago. Everything felt right again, like we'd picked up exactly where we left off. I have 2 kids, aged 13 and 10, from a previous relationship. They're the absolute light of my life, but their father, my ex, was an absolute nightmare. He was neglectful, abusive, and never really showed any interest in being a father. When I reconnected with Mark, I wasn't sure how he'd feel about me having kids, but he didn't mind at all. He was really supportive from the start. Mark treated my kids like his own. He made sure they felt like they were his priority. He's been there for them in every way. Mark has been there for them in every way, whether it's emotionally, financially, or physically. He's been a father to them in every sense of the word. They don't even see my ex as their dad anymore, they see Mark as their real father. He's been there for every scraped knee, every school play, and every sleepless night. He's truly been an amazing husband and stepdad. I'm a stay-at-home mom, I'm not sure what to do. Mark is the main breadwinner for our family. He works hard, and I've always appreciated that. The issue is that I might have been setting really bad examples for the kids. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back now, I can see how my behavior might have influenced them. I've always had this habit of lightly teasing Mark. I never thought it was a big deal, just harmless jokes. But now I'm starting to wonder if those harmless jokes weren't so harmless after all. It started off innocently enough. I'd make little comments about his height, mostly when we were joking around. Mark isn't a tall guy. I've always had this habit of lightly teasing Mark. I never thought it was a big deal, just harmless jokes. But now, I'm starting to wonder if those harmless jokes weren't so harmless after all. It started off innocently enough. I'd make little comments about his height, mostly when we were joking around. Mark isn't a tall guy. While Mark has always been sensitive about it, I thought that since we were so close, teasing him about it was fine. I'd say things like, "Hey honey, can you reach that?" Or, "Oh wait, probably not." We'd laugh it off, or at least I thought we did. But the jokes didn't stop there. I started making jokes about other things too. I started teasing him about his appearance, hair, clothes, and overall look. I'd say things like, "Hey honey, can you reach that?" Or, "You need to get your hair under control today." Then, I'd move on to teasing him about his clumsiness. Mark's always been a bit accident-prone, and I used to find it endearing. But somewhere along the way I started teasing him about it. Calling him names like Mr. Butterfingers. Or saying he'd trip over his own feet if he wasn't careful. It didn't stop there either. I made fun of his hobbies. He's really into video games and comic books, and I used to joke about how childish that was. I even teased him. I also teased Mark about his job. He works in a field I don't fully understand, and I sometimes made comments like, "You're just pressing buttons all day," or, "What exactly do you do at work?" I thought it was all in good fun and never meant to hurt him. I thought that because we were so close, these little jabs would be taken as playful banter. Mark took it all in good fun and never really said anything about it. He'd either laugh along or just brush it off, so I figured it was no big deal. Looking back though, I realize I was slowly chipping away at him, bit by bit. What I saw as light teasing was probably wearing him down more than I ever imagined. And the worst part is that I did it in front of the kids too. I didn't think twice about it. I'd make a joke about Mark's driving if we were on a road trip, like, "Oh, here comes another one of Dad's famous wrong turns." Or if we were out shopping, I'd make fun of how slow he walks compared to me. It was all in good fun. I didn't think about how they might see it. Kids copy what they see, so it's no surprise they started teasing Mark too. I thought it was fine because my kids saw me joking about their dad all the time, but hearing it from them must have been different for Mark. I made fun of everything in front of the kids and didn't think twice about whether it was having an impact. I never thought it was anything but harmless fun. I stopped to think about how my behavior might be affecting Mark and our children. It wasn't long before the kids started to copy me, picking up on the teasing and running with it. I thought it was funny when they mocked Mark, and I laughed along with them. I didn't see any issue with it. In fact, it became a bit of a family joke, something we'd do together. It wasn't meant to be taken seriously, it was just a bit of fun. So when the kids would say things like, "Dad, are you sure you can reach that?" Or, "Wow, good job, Dad. You only tripped once today," I thought it was cute. I saw it as just playful banter. If Mark ever said anything about it, or even hinted that it bothered him, I'd brush him off. I'd tell him he was overreacting, and that it wasn't that serious. "Come on, it's just a joke," I'd say. Or, "You shouldn't take it so seriously all the time." Looking back, I see how I was completely out of line. I was basically saying that his feelings didn't matter, and that I didn't even realize it. I didn't take a second to think about how it might be affecting him, or how it might be tearing him down. Looking back, I feel horrible about it. I feel really bad about it now, even though I didn't think about how it would make him feel. If it were the other way around and Mark were teasing me in front of the kids, I'd be really upset. But at the time, I just didn't see it that way. The worst part was that the kids didn't just keep the teasing at home. It started spilling over into public, and that's when things really started to get out of hand. They'd make little jokes about Mark at family gatherings in front of friends, even at school events. I remember one time at a family barbecue, my 10-year-old a year ago, my dad was teased for being short, with the joke being that he needed a stool to reach the grill. I thought it was funny, but I didn't realize how uncomfortable it made Mark feel. He tried to play it off, but it was the same with friends too. The kids would tease him whenever we were out, and I'd just laugh along. I thought it made them look confident, but in reality they were just imitating what they saw at home. They thought it was perfectly acceptable to mock Mark. Their mum did it all the time and Mark would laugh it off, but I should have seen through it. I should have realized that behind those forced chuckles, he was probably feeling humiliated. I can only imagine how much it must have stung to have the people he cared about most, his wife and the kids he loves like his own, mocking him in front of others. Especially when I should have been the one standing up for him. But I didn't. I just kept going, and the kids did too. I thought it was funny. I thought it was. In hindsight, I realize I was wrong. I wasn't just making fun of Mark, I was teaching my kids that it was okay to disrespect him. I was showing them that it was okay to tear someone down to laugh at someone else's expense. All the while, I was ignoring Mark's feelings, pushing them aside like they didn't matter. Mark started to become distant, not just from me, but from the kids too. I noticed it, of course, but I didn't want to believe it was anything serious. It seemed gradual at first, little by little. There were a few things here and there that didn't seem like a big deal at the time. He started coming home late from work, saying he had to stay late, or that he was dealing with a big project. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured he was just stressed, busy with deadlines and so on. Work always had its ups and downs, so I didn't think much of it when he started spending more time at the office. But then the kids started to notice. They'd asked me why Dad was acting weird, and why he wasn't spending time with them like he used to. My 13-year-old. A year ago, my kids would ask me why their dad was always in his office, and why he wasn't spending time with them like he used to. I brushed it off, telling them he was just tired or stressed at work. I told myself it was temporary, and that he was going through a rough patch, but looking back, the signs were there. I ignored them, as I had been doing for a long time. Or I wouldn't realize that he was being distant on purpose. I didn't even think that maybe I had something to do with it. Mark had always been the rock of our family. He was always so patient and so loving. I took that for granted. I assumed he would always be there for us, no matter what. So when he started pulling away, I didn't understand why. I thought it was just stress. I was convinced that things would go back to normal once his work slowed down. But they didn't. They got worse. Mark started coming home even later. Sometimes he'd come in after the kids had already gone to bed. I'd ask him how his day was, and he'd give me a short answer. I put it down to stress, and thought that things would get back to normal once his work slowed down. In fact, they got worse. Mark started coming home even later, sometimes after the kids had already gone to bed. I'd ask him how his day was, and he'd give me a short answer. He'd say that everything was fine, or that he was busy. That was it. No more long chats about our days or laughing over dinner. He'd eat quickly and disappear into the bedroom or the office, saying that he needed to catch up on emails, or that he was too tired to stay up. I didn't push him on it. I figured that he just needed space. Again, I blamed work stress. But the distance wasn't just physical. Emotionally, he was pulling away too. I can see that now. He stopped engaging with the kids in the same way. Before, he was always so involved, playing board games with them, helping with homework, or just sitting down to watch a movie together. Those moments became fewer and fewer. He'd sit on the couch with us, but he'd be on his phone or staring at the TV, barely paying attention to what was going on. The kids would try to joke around with him and tease him in that playful way they'd learned from me, and he'd just force a smile. It was like he wasn't really there anymore. I kept telling myself I thought it was just a temporary blip, and that he'd snap out of it once things settled down. But deep down, I think I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to face it. I didn't want to believe that my teasing and jokes and the way I'd brushed off his feelings for so long could actually be pushing him away. I didn't want to believe that I had been. I was also contributing to his withdrawal. So instead, I chose to ignore it and pretend like it was all just stress or a rough patch. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. Mark was slowly pulling away, and I did nothing to stop it. I didn't try to talk to him or ask him what was really going on. I just assumed it wasn't a big deal. I was doing things the way I'd always done, and in doing that, I let the distance grow wider and wider until it felt like we were living in two different worlds under the same roof. I hate to admit it, but I was selfish. I was too caught up in my own world, too focused on myself and my own frustrations to notice that my husband was drifting further. I should have seen the signs sooner. I should have asked him how he was really feeling. I should have listened instead of dismissing everything as just stress. But I didn't, and now I'm paying the price. Even though I noticed Mark's growing distance, I didn't make the kids stop teasing him. I didn't stop myself. Even when Mark started to complain more and more, I still thought it was just a bit of harmless fun. I convinced myself that he was stressed at work, and that was why he couldn't take a joke anymore. I thought he'd snap out of it once things calmed down, and he'd go back to laughing along with us as he used to. So every time he mentioned that the teasing was getting to him, I'd brush it off and tell him to relax. I told the kids the same thing. I mean, it was all in good fun, right? I figured he just needed to lighten up. Looking back, I realized how selfish that was. Instead of listening to what Mark was saying, I assumed I was overreacting. I couldn't understand that maybe I was the one at fault for his growing frustration and distance. I didn't want to take responsibility for how I'd encouraged the kids to mock him, or for creating an atmosphere where his feelings were dismissed. I see that now, but at the time I refused to see it. Everything finally came to a head one evening during dinner. The tension had been building for weeks, maybe even months. Dinner was always a bit awkward. Those days, Mark had been so distant lately. He was emotionally checked out and barely spoke to me or the kids unless he had to. We all felt the strain, although no one said it out loud. The kids could sense something was off, but they didn't know how to fix it. I could sense something was off, but I didn't know how to fix it. I guess they thought a joke would help, maybe lighten the mood or get a chuckle out of Mark. They were trying in their own way to break through the silence that night. My youngest started it. He made a joke about Mark being short. I had probably made a dozen similar jokes. There had been times before when the kids laughed, thinking it was harmless, just as I had taught them to think. Mark sighed heavily, clearly not in the mood. He asked them to stop, but they didn't take him seriously, to be honest, neither did I. I chuckled and told him, "Oh, come on, it's just a joke. Lighten up." I was so used to dismissing his feelings that I didn't even think about the fact that he might actually be hurt. I didn't think twice about telling him he was being too serious and too sensitive. In my mind, he was still just stressed from work, and I thought a little teasing wasn't a big deal. But this time, it was different. This time, Mark didn't just sigh and awkwardly laugh it off. He usually did, but this time he snapped. He stood up from the table, his face red with frustration. He said he was tired of all of it, tired of being mocked by his own family, tired of me brushing him off every time he told me how he felt. He said he was done. That he was done with all of us. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was shocked and honestly furious. I thought he was overreacting and blowing up over something so small in front of the kids. I felt embarrassed and angry that he would do this in front of them. I stared at him, my mouth open, but no words came out. The kids were silent, wide-eyed. The kids and I were all pretty shocked. We'd never seen Mark like this before. I was pretty mad at him for getting so upset over a joke. I guess I hadn't fully grasped how serious he was. I told him he was making a scene in front of the kids and he should just let it go. But Mark didn't let it go. He shook his head and walked out of the dining room. I heard the front door slam behind him. I sat there for a few minutes, stunned. I couldn't believe he'd walked out like that over something so minor. In my mind, he was being overly serious again. I was sure that when he came back, I would have to have a word with him about why he was overreacting. I was annoyed that he had made such a fuss over a joke, especially in front of the kids. They didn't deserve to see him snap like that. I felt like it was his fault for making things worse. I told myself that he would calm down and come back, and that we'd sort it out. I figured I'd talk some sense into him when he returned, and explain to him why he was being. I was really sensitive about it. I didn't realize how much it hurt him, or how much damage I'd done to the kids. I couldn't see how serious things had become. I thought it was just another argument that we'd get past, but I was wrong. Mark didn't come home that night. I waited up for him, thinking he'd cool off and come back so we could talk things through, but hour after hour passed, and when midnight came and went, I realized he wasn't coming back. I was confused, hurt, and angry. How could he just... I couldn't believe he'd just leave us like that. I didn't understand why a simple joke, a joke we'd all been making for years, had pushed him to such an extreme reaction. The next day, I found out from his sister that Mark was staying at her place. I thought about calling him, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe I was still in denial. I convinced myself that he just needed some space, that he'd cool off in a few days and we'd talk like adults. But a few days turned into a week, and every night I went to bed with the hope that he'd come. The next day came and went, and so did every morning. The kids were asking about him, and I didn't know what to say. I just told them he was busy with work, but I could tell they didn't believe me. Finally, after a full week, Mark came home. I felt a huge wave of relief when I saw him walk through the door. I thought he was back, so we could talk and settle things once and for all. I even started planning what I would say to apologize and explain that I never meant to hurt him. But when he looked at me, I knew something. He was wrong. His face wasn't angry anymore, it was cold and detached. He wasn't here to reconcile. He told me he was done. He couldn't do it anymore with me or with the kids. He said he'd give us time to pack our things and leave, for the sake of the children. He said we could take as long as we needed, which was a shock. I hadn't seen this coming. I was still hoping he was just upset over a joke, but here he was telling me to leave. My anger surged. I couldn't believe he was doing this to us over what was just a bit of teasing. I told him he was overreacting and that it wasn't fair to kick us out over something so small, but he didn't yell back. He just stood there detached and said he was done trying. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, and didn't even flinch. He told me he was tired of being the punchline, tired of feeling disrespected in his own home, and emotionally checked out just to cope. He said he wasn't going to take it anymore. I wanted to fight back to make him see how ridiculous he was being. I suddenly realized how ridiculous he was being. He was so calm and matter-of-fact about it. I felt like a wave crashing down on me. I had really hurt him. This wasn't just about one joke or even a few. It was about years of me dismissing his feelings and encouraging the kids to mock him. He felt disrespected in our home, and now he was done. He wasn't coming back to talk things through or to make up. He told me it was over. As my anger faded, panic and grief set in. I started crying and begged him to reconsider. I told him I didn't realize how much I had hurt him. I said we could fix it and that I was sorry. I pleaded with him, telling him how much the kids loved him and how heartbroken they would be. But nothing made him change his mind. He said he was done and walked away, leaving me standing there in shock. I kept crying, but it didn't matter. He wasn't going to change his mind. He'd already made up his mind, and it's been about a week since that conversation. Things have only gotten more awkward and unbearable. Mark is still living in the house, but it feels like he's miles away. He's avoiding me, and he avoids the kids as much as he can. He works longer hours, and when he's home, he barely speaks to us. The kids have noticed, of course. They've asked why Mark isn't spending time with them like he used to, and why he's acting so cold. I don't know what to say. How do I explain to them that this is all my fault? That I've hurt the man they see as their father so deeply that he's now emotionally checked out from all of us? I see now that I was wrong. I taught the kids to mock him because I thought it was harmless. I never thought about the impact it was having on Mark. I see now that he wasn't overreacting. He was just trying to tell me that he was hurting, but I refused to listen. I invalidated his feelings for so long that now he's done with me and with us. I don't know what to do. I don't want this. I don't want him to leave. The kids would be devastated, but I don't know how to fix this. I need to show him that I'm sorry and that I understand how much I've hurt him. Is it too late? It's been about a week since that happened, and the atmosphere in the house is unbearable. Mark is still here, but he's avoiding me and the kids. He works longer hours and barely interacts with us when he's home. The kids have noticed his coldness, and they've been asking why he isn't spending time with them. I have no idea what to say. How do I tell them that this is all my fault, that I taught them these habits, encouraged them to mock him, and now I've pushed him away? I realize now how selfish I've been. I let the teasing go on for too long, invalidating Mark's feelings every time he tried to speak up. I always brushed it off, thinking it was harmless fun, but I see now that I was wrong. I've hurt him deeply, and now he's emotionally checked out. He doesn't want to fight or argue anymore. He's just done. I don't want this. I don't want him to leave. The kids would be devastated, but I don't know how to fix this. How do I show him that I'm truly sorry? I understand now. Is it too late to make things right? I'm lost and I feel like everything is slipping away. I just want to make things right before it's too late. I'm afraid I've lost him for good. I'm at a complete loss, and I feel like the walls are closing in. How can I make things right before I lose everything? Update: I've been taking a good look at things, and I've realized that I've played a big part in the mess my marriage is in. I've also noticed that I've allowed bad habits to develop in my household. It's been about a week since things went down between Mark and me, and I have to tell you that things haven't got any easier. The tension in the house is still there. Mark has also stopped helping out at home. Now that he's stopped doing all the things he used to do, I can see just how much he was handling. I didn't notice it before because I was so used to him quietly doing things behind the scenes. I took a lot of that for granted. The kids didn't do any of the chores either. I didn't really enforce much discipline when it came to chores. The kids could stay on their phones all day, play games or do whatever they wanted, and I never thought twice about it. I thought I was being lenient and even fun, but I didn't realize I was making them lazy. Meanwhile, Mark was picking up the slack and taking care of the household responsibilities without ever complaining. Now that he's stepped back, I'm facing the reality that I've let things spiral out of control. It's been a wake-up call seeing how much he contributed, from doing the dishes to keeping the house in order. Many of you suggested I sit down with Mark and have a real, honest conversation. I've been thinking about it non-stop. I've realized that this is bigger than just a couple of jokes or teasing. It's about the way I've been neglecting Mark's feelings and pushing him to the breaking point. He's been carrying so much of the emotional and physical labor in our home, and I never acknowledged it. I've decided I'm going to follow your advice. Have that conversation with him, even if it means accepting whatever decision he makes. It's going to be tough because I know there's a chance he's already made up his mind and might want to leave for good. But I owe it to him to listen, accept responsibility for what I've done, and give him the space to express his "I don't know what'll happen, but I've realized I can't ignore the problem any longer. I'm ready to face whatever comes next, and I'll let him know that I'm willing to change and do whatever it takes to fix things. Not just for him, but for the sake of our kids and our family again." I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to comment and share their thoughts. I really appreciate it. You've opened my eyes to a lot of things I was BL to. I'm determined to do better moving forward. Update: this is me again. If you're just stumbling upon this, you can check my profile for my previous posts. I've been having some serious glitches with the app, so it took me hours to get this posted, but here I am, as I promised. I wanted to update you all after talking to Mark. We had a very long and emotional conversation, and let me tell you, it was intense. We're getting a divorce. The longer version of the story is, it was really tough to hear Mark say that he feels like he's become the butt of every joke, and that he's emotionally checked out of our marriage. He told me that this didn't just happen overnight. It's been a gradual process that he's been feeling for quite some time now. He said that he realized he was truly done when he found himself feeling I was relieved and happy not to come home while he was staying at his sister's. That revelation really hit me hard. I won't go into every detail of our conversation, but it was really painful for me. I broke down in front of him, and I'm thankful the kids weren't home to witness it. I can't even put into words how I felt. I was really hurt when he said those things. It felt like a part of me just shattered, and now I'm trying to pick up the pieces. I keep replaying the conversation in my head, trying to understand how we got here. It feels surreal, like I'm trapped in some kind of nightmare that I can't wake up from. 1 minute everything seemed fine, and now it feels like my whole life is unraveling. I never imagined we'd end up here, especially after everything we've been through together. I'm at a loss for what to do next. My world has basically flipped upside down and I'm struggling to find my footing. I keep thinking about the kids and how this will affect them. I'm really worried about how they'll cope with the pain. I want to make things as easy as possible for them, but I also need to figure out how to deal with my own feelings of loss and betrayal. If anyone has gone through something similar, I'd really appreciate any advice or insights you can share. I'm feeling really lost right now, and I'd appreciate some guidance on how to navigate this situation. Hello again, Reddit. It's been a couple of weeks since my last update. I've been busy, so it's taken me this long to sit down and write. I feel like I just want to crawl into a dark room and wallow in my guilt and misery. But I can't afford to do that. I have my kids to think about, and they need me to be strong and proactive right now. First of all, I've come to realize that I didn't have much in terms of savings, which isn't surprising considering my terrible saving habits. I had to face the harsh reality that I was going to need help, so I reached out to. I've also been in touch with my parents and siblings to give them an update on what's been going on. Thankfully, my parents offered to let us stay with them while I figured everything out. Moving in with my parents has been a bit of a process. It took us longer than I expected to pack everything up, mostly because the kids were so confused and upset about as we loaded up the car, I could see the bewilderment in their eyes. It broke my heart to see them hurting. I think they're resentful of me for how everything has unfolded. I really don't know how to handle their emotions right now. I feel like I've let them down, and it's hard to know what to say. Once we finally moved into my parents' house, things didn't settle down. I was served with divorce papers soon after, which came as a shock. I knew it was coming, but seeing the actual documents made it all too real. I've been trying to get my head around everything while simultaneously navigating on top of everything. I'm also dealing with the chaos of my everyday life and the stress of job hunting. I've been so focused on keeping the kids emotionally stable that I've barely had a moment to grieve the end of my marriage. It feels like my world has caved in and I'm trying to pick up the pieces. I want to be strong for my kids, but I'm also dealing with my own heartbreak and emotional issues right now. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm relieved that we aren't homeless and that my parents are willing to help us out during this difficult time. I know I need to find a job quickly, but the thought of balancing work with the emotional weight I'm carrying is overwhelming. Thanks to everyone who has reached out with advice and support, however few you might be. I appreciate all of you more than I can express. If anyone has tips for dealing with this kind of situation, especially when it comes to talking to the kids about what's happening, I'd love to hear them. Firstly, I've finally landed a job. It's not the most glamorous position, but it's something, and it feels good to contribute towards the household expenses while we're living with my parents. Speaking of which, the kids have had to adjust to a new school since we moved in with my family, and they're really struggling with it. It's not that the school is bad, in fact, I think it's quite nice. But they're having a hard time accepting that the kids are still struggling with the change, especially since it means they've had to leave Mark behind. They're not over the separation yet, and it's evident in their moods and attitudes. They do call Mark occasionally, and thankfully he picks up. He's even come over a few times to visit them, which brings some comfort, but I know deep down that things will never be the same as they used to be. The kids miss the routine we had as a family, and it's really tough on them. I was really sad to see them so lost. On another note, the divorce has been finalized. It happened really quickly, just an hour in the courthouse since we hadn't been married for long. The process was fairly straightforward. But it was really hard for me. I still love him and it's really difficult to accept that it's truly over. Thankfully, we didn't have any shared debts, and child support wasn't an issue since his name wasn't on the kids' birth certificates. We had discussed him adopting them at one point, but that's no longer going to happen. There was no spousal support, and everything was resolved so quickly. The house was his, and I had to let go of that part of our life to cope with everything. The kids and I have started therapy. We're all trying to come to terms with the situation and process our feelings. It's been a particularly tough time, so I'm hoping that this will help them feel a little better. To be honest, I've just been trying to get through it and stay afloat. I'm tired and exhausted, both emotionally and physically. There are days when I feel completely overwhelmed, but I know I need to keep fighting for my kids. They're my priority, and I want to create a stable environment for them despite everything we've been through.